My guest today is Joel Rubin, who needs no introduction, expert
nice.
in the Middle East and much else. He was a senior State Department official in the Obama administration, now regularly on the news, talking about foreign affairs and much else. Right? I know you've been talking about the upcoming elections, and I want to get to that at the end. But
Yeah.
Joel, I reached out to you a week ago or so because I wanted to talk to you in some ways because I wanted to get out there my thoughts about what's gone on and bounce them off of you. And obviously, and since then I asked you to come on. We've had this breaking news, right, about the ceasefire imploding.
Yes.
So, were you surprised that this ceasefire has not held?
Vicky, first of all, thank you for including me and getting an opportunity to speak with you and your audience. It's a real honor to be with you, and I'm a fan. And I'm not surprised, regrettably, for two primary reasons. First and foremost, this is sort of like the way things always seem to go when it comes to Israel, Hamas, and Gaza. They had wars going back to 2008, 2009, 2014, 2021, skirmishes in between, lots of ceasefires, lots of discussion. And so that, to me, that understanding should always have been built into this project of this current ceasefire, not peace. It's not a peace treaty. There's no peace deal. The parties didn't sign in a public way and shake hands like they did during Oslo. But I am also not surprised, unfortunately, because the mechanisms that we needed to prevent this from happening are not yet in place. And it's almost as if the signing, the agreement, the desire for the announcement, and clearly the humanitarian impacts also, which are real and can't be dismissed, is important. That all went so fast in such a quick time frame that it surpassed the infrastructure needed to monitor and really have clarity about what the ceasefire should look like on the ground. So I hope they get that straight, because we're on the precipice right now.
Well, I mean, how do you pull back from the brink right now?
Yeah.
I mean, do you see Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff flying back over there?
I mean, it's funny, in Israel, in the Israeli press, you may have seen it, they called it Bibi-Sitting over the past week or so, where the vice president was out there, and clearly the president prior, and then the Secretary of State, and Witkoff, and Kushner. I think those were all the right moves. I actually do think that was crucial. There's no replacement for this conflict when it comes to oversight and mediation than high level United States engagement. No matter how many politicians and policy experts and pundits and elected officials want to say we don't need to be applied, we do. And so, yes, I think they should encamp. I think they should get apartments in Tel Aviv and sit there. They might have apartments in Tel Aviv, quite frankly, for all I know already. But I think that we need ongoing high-level political engagement on a daily basis. We need American statements that don't come out saying it's fine, everything's okay, the ceasefire still exists, when it doesn't pass the eye test. And we need our statements to be very aligned with the partners who are our co-signatories to the agreement, Qatar and Turkey and Egypt, so that there's sort of a squared circle around this that keeps the parties engaged and not fighting and killing each other.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because, for so many reasons. It's interesting that the Israeli press call it Bibi-Sitting, because obviously what Bibi gave everybody an opening, right? By the overreach in Qatar. And so, arguably that gave Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff and obviously Donald Trump, the excuse to go and sort of play the strongmen. I don't mean that in a, autocratic way. But it gave America leverage, right? And so the question is now, what leverage? The hostages are out. What's the leverage?
Couple of thoughts on this. The way I'm trying to describe the leverage that was used and applied by President Trump and his team was, I would call it positive leverage as opposed to negative leverage. And that still exists, right? The leverage of the political power that he has in the Israeli body politic, where he could probably, through one Truth Social post, terminate Netanyahu's political career. He has that kind of power inside Israel right now. And it even grew. It only grew after the hostages were released. So that's one side of the equation. And he's laid out, to his credit, publicly his red lines. There will not be annexation. It was very overt. It's stunning, by the way, politically here, how that has not engendered any pushback domestically here in the United States by anybody, including those who advocate for the settlements. They're afraid of crossing Donald Trump on this issue. So he's put that line out there. J.D. Vance, to his credit, my criticism aside about the speed and all, is essentially saying, I wasn't pleased at all with that symbolic vote about the West Bank, and that led to the statement by the president.
Yeah.
So they're kind of laying out some lines. Problem is that's West Bank stuff. And the issue is Gaza right now. West Bank, I'm not diminishing the conflict, the fight there, but that's not the ceasefire. That's not ground zero for the ceasefire. So what needs to happen is to reiterate again and again the principles of the agreement and the point of the agreement in the public way, just like we saw with the West Bank stuff. And maybe that's some of the value added by having those arguments, because it made it clear. And this is something I always was frustrated with the Biden team for not doing effectively. They didn't speak to the Israeli public in a way that built up political equity for President Biden so that he could do what Donald Trump is doing. So that's what I think they're doing, and they're doing it from a position of strength in the Trump team. And they should use that to reiterate the principles of the ceasefire. This massive bombardment, I understand why the Israelis are frustrated. The video of the fake burial of a deceased person, Hamas is probably hiding corpses to be macabre about it. But to then go on a bombing raid of that ends up killing over 100 people should be over the line, right? In any way. And I think that's where the president could say that's over the line. I support your desire to get at this, but that's over the line. But he can't just do that and leave it alone. What he has to do is to say, here's what we're doing. We, the United States, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey, as the core four, here's what we are doing to ensure that this agreement is going into force. And use that time and again in public messaging into Israel and into Israeli society, because, I think I'll just close with this. I think there is clearly suspicion that, now the hostages are out, therefore Israel is freedom of action, whatnot. That's not the vision of the ceasefire agreement. And that's not what the Arab states signed on to. And that's not what they came to the press event for in Sharm el-Sheikh. They came at it with a little bit of bigger vision about where to go. And the quicksand always of these Israel-Palestine diplomacies, always that negotiators get sucked into like a funnel, into like this little issue set of the fight, the back and forth over the day, and they lose the big picture. So that would be what has to happen. And by having that big picture communicated, that helps on sort of working through the violations that, by the way, Hamas is violating it. by not turning over all the bodies. I got to say that very clearly. And they should not be allowed to play games with dead bodies in order to just sort of like see what they, turn on their machine as well.
Testing in effect.
I think they're testing.
Do you think, and this is a sort of loaded question, I mean, there's no question, I think, that Jared Kushner's long-standing relationship with Bibi played a big part in what happened last week.
It had to.
And at the same time,
and his relationship with Qatar.
Well, I was going to say his relationship with a lot of the players
Yes.
in that region, and of course, I wrote a book that was very critical of Jared Kushner's foreign affairs dealings, pointing out the potential for conflicts around his family's real estate business. And I stand by the book and the reporting in that book 100%. But it did come out in the year before the Abraham Accords. And you have to give him, sometimes two things can be true at once, right?
That's right.
that the conflicts were there, and yet he also did something extraordinary, possibly because of them. And I think, I watched his interview with Steve Witkoff. They, interviewed by Leslie Stahl on 60 Minutes, and she asked him this question about the conflicts, and he kind of said, well, without my close ties to these leaders, how else would you get a negotiation like this? How else would you get a ceasefire? And I think that is, look, and I will say that I there's no way I'm not going to give Jared Kushner huge credit for going out there and pulling off the ceasefire, because I think it was extraordinary, and I'm going to happily to be on record saying that. But I've always wondered about the Kushner's relationship with Bibi. Is it a help or is it a hindrance, or is it both?
It's a multi-layered question, right? Because first and foremost, I mean, the Kushner family does go back to they have ties to like settlement activity and contributions, and so in some weird kind of like out of body kind of world that we're living in these days, you have him basically enmeshed financially with all the players, right? Because the settlers are the base of the Netanyahu coalition. And so I don't buy it that you have to have conflicts of interest to be an effective diplomat, right? Like I'm not saying it hurt him, but I don't think it's a prerequisite, shall we say. I don't think Jimmy Carter was getting side deals when he negotiated peace between Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin. But that said, that's the world we're currently living in. And they were very careful in how they talked about it. But to his credit, those relationships he was able to leverage, right?
Yeah.
And so he had, outside of government work, first Trump and this Trump, 4 years of business. And that made a difference. Now, what does it do for Netanyahu? I'll go back to the previous one. I'm not sure it did much on Netanyahu. I really do think, and again, this is sort of like I have mixed feelings about this too, right? Because, Donald Trump was able to use tools of persuasion that, frankly, no American president has or had even. Clinton didn't have it. Obama didn't have it. Biden didn't have it. Bush didn't have it. He was in a war in Iraq, and he was trying to get a two-state solution and peace discussions and all, and he didn't have that. But he didn't have Netanyahu as often as he had other leaders, and they got close with Olmert. They didn't get there. So I don't think it was Kushner and his ties to Netanyahu as much as this sort of overall recognition that Donald Trump built up so much political equity inside the Israeli body politic, from moving the embassy to Jerusalem to recognizing the Golan Heights to bombing Iran and its nuclear
Right,
facilities. I mean, check the
right.
box on everything. And the Israeli people across the board were like, he's with us. And Netanyahu is not so popular. And I think he looked over his shoulder and said, this is the risk. But it complemented now, but there's a gap in the relationships. They just got to make this right, which is with the Palestinians, right? Like, so who are the interlocutors directly of the Palestinian people? There aren't any, quite frankly. It's
Well,
third
but
parties,
remember that
countries that
on
they're working with, is what I mean.
right,
Um, there's Abbas, there are others, but like the Kushner relationships are with the Arab states and the Gulf
yes.
states, but not with like a Palestinian entity.
No, although I thought it was fascinating in the 60 Minutes interview where both Jared and Steve Witkoff talked about how they went into that meeting with the lead negotiator for Hamas,
Yes.
and they talked about what they had in common, and that was the fact that both Steve Witkoff and the Hamas leader had lost their sons.
I mean, my God, Vicky, I'm sorry, I got, it's like Steve Witkoff touched the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth rail of
Yeah,
Israeli politics and American Jewish politics on the conflict. And he just blew it up and went right there. And he's still standing. And, you know, I mean, it's remarkable that an American negotiator publicly talks about how he made common cause on an emotional level with a lead negotiator of Hamas. It is remarkable. And
it
I'll
was
tell you what.
remarkable. And that was a moment
Yes.
where I did see, and I am the last person in the world I thought I would ever hear saying what I'm about to say. But I did see the benefit of being a New York real estate developer going in to a meeting like that. And I speak as someone who's written a book about the world of New York developers, because before they go into a sort of negotiation, they are looking for, what is it that we can find to persuade the person on the other side? And often in the world, the world of New York real estate can often be a sleazy world. It could be a hooker, frankly. Do they want a mistress? What do they really
What
want?
do I need to
Then,
give
in other
that?
words,
Yeah.
yeah, but they'll forget, what do they really want, where they'll forget, or it will soften the blow of what we actually want to talk about. And I thought that it was, when they talked about that so emotionally on 60 Minutes, it was extraordinary. And I don't think you would have ever got a traditional diplomat doing that.
You know, I want to extend the metaphor on real estate, but I also want to mention that earlier, Adam Bowler, who was a sort of refugee diplomat in the early months of this administration, went out there and talked to Hamas and admitted it on TV, right? And nobody is ready for it. And I think it cost him his job, or at least it moved him out of the way for a little bit. It had to take a friend of the president, because like Witkoff and Kushner, for the titles, whatever, it doesn't matter. They're basically friends of the president and family. That's it, friends and family. And that is where it is very similar to these Middle Eastern countries. But to extend the metaphor, one of the things that I'm concerned about, which is why we might very well be in the position we're in right now with this ceasefire, is that Witkoff, to use him as the name, but Witkoff et al., they didn't operate like the purchaser or the seller. They operated like the broker of the deal. And so they brokered the deal, and then they got away. And they let the Israelis and the Palestinians, Hamas, they're the owners of it, right? But the broker's out in their mind. But the broker's never out. And
Yeah.
this is the thing. The broker is a partner.
Yes.
It's a self-dealing in the extreme kind of
Yes.
conflicts. You have to be a partner. You're not in and out. You're not a broker. And they were brokers. But that's not the right way to think about it. If you're a real estate guy, you also are getting part of the deal yourself. You're basically self-selling. You are your own representative, but you got to be in this with all four. And not just during the negotiation, but throughout to see it through. And that's where I also, get worried about the flamboyance, the celebrity of the Sharm el Sheikh event with peace. It's like, no, it's not peace in our time. We've seen these before. You probably remember, I think it was in Sharm in like 95 when Perez was prime minister and Hamas had conducted several bus bombings in Tel Aviv and killed a lot of Israelis. And I blame Hamas for torpedoing the Oslo process in many ways. They did that when Perez was prime minister. And he had like a dozen Arab state leaders around in Sharm 30 years ago. This is not the first time that's been done. In fact, probably somebody at state worked on that one and is now working on this one. I wouldn't be surprised. So they've now set themselves up, but they can't walk away as if it's done. We are a party to this, and if we walk away, it will fall right back into the hot war mess that they just found a way to stop.
Right. So you were not joking when you said you hope Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff have found themselves apartments in Tel Aviv.
Not in the least bit. And maybe they should also get a second apartment down in Ashdod or Beersheba, even a little closer to the action. Yeah, no, they love Israel, so time to relocate. It's winter time, anyways. It's a nice time out there. I really think that this requires the having the emissary of the president, the friends and family, call them that, is an effective combination. It's demonstrated itself, right? Like the leader talks. And when they said this, I could pick up the phone and talk to the emir. I could pick up the phone and talk to the leader. There's a real truth in that. In the State Department bureaucracy where I lived for a number of years, to get the secretary to engage in a phone call requires a whole layering of memos and coordination and approvals internally before going to the White House for approval. And then there are points laid out, and the secretary calls the prime minister, and then they get a readout. No, none of that. This is like straight shot from Trump, and that's good enough.
Well, I guess how this plays out in the next week is going to be kind of critical.
I really hope Hamas gets the memo and hands over these hostages. It's not going to go well for them anyways. I do think Trump will support Israeli bombing to a certain extent if they don't return. They're not standing on high ground here. In the Trump view of this agreement, they're violating the agreement. And I hope the Israelis recognize that the kind of strikes they took were so over the top, so overdone in a ways, the numbers, that both sides have to look in the mirror and decide, again, knowing very well that the world is watching them on this. And yeah, I know I'm sort of making a little bit of a word salad out of it, except to say that you're right, that we can't give a day of breath to just think it'll all kind of magically resolve itself. We have to be holding, this is the core thing of American leadership. We have to be holding their hands, feet to the fire, and constantly reviewing and having our teams in this coordination center, this cell, working assiduously and putting fine details on the expectations and making it clear on a repetitive basis. Because if we don't, it will collapse.
Right. And then let me ask you, this is going to sound a very, very basic question. It was something that I was thinking about, as I'm looking at the photographs of President Trump in South Korea. I feel like President Trump is abroad more, it feels like to me, than many of his predecessors. I mean, you worked for President Obama. Is there any metric to gauge this, or not really, or? But
In that the
President Trump, he bops around. I feel like we see him often.
yes.
It's
Isn't
part of
that
what
the
he wants us
craziest
to see,
thing?
right? The global statesman. That's exactly what he's going for.
I mean, he's demanding a Nobel Peace Prize, right? Like,
Yeah.
where did this come from? It is fascinating. I don't know if air miles traveled. I'm sure somebody's tracking it and watching it out there. But to your point, he even here at the UN, he's really engaged in foreign affairs,
Yeah.
and the tariff policy. I can give my critique. I'm not going to. I just say from a political perspective, what the tariff policy did is it gave him a platform to talk to every country in the world, right? Like it basically became his own multilateral organization.
Yeah.
Like we don't need the UN. I'm just analysis wise, we don't need the UN. We don't need the OAS. We don't need the WTO. It's mine. I'm tariffing the world. Now they're going to have to talk to me. And there's a lot of downsides with that policy. But from a foreign policy engagement perspective, it basically means the whole world's coming to him.
Yeah.
And look, he's a second term president, so he's already a lame duck, despite the 2028 stuff. Government shut down to boot. Congress is ineffectual and responds to whatever he wants anyways. And usually lame duck presidents become foreign policy presidents. And that's an historic thing. That's when they really use their commander-in-chief hat, even when the Congress is doing its job. And in this case, it's not doing anything. So we're starting wars in South America and Venezuela, unauthorized, unprovoked, and we're just killing people all across the board in the Caribbean, right? So to be, it sounds so, I don't mean to sound trite, but that's what we're doing. And so he's acting like a second term lame duck president, where he's decided I'm the commander in chief, and that is a unique authority that nobody in the United States federal government has, and I'm going to use it for everything I can. And he's created this tariff platform. My big concern on the big conflicts like Ukraine and Russia, and obviously Hamas, Israel, is the follow through. Is the consistent message, and is the ability to build a sustained support network to see the follow through happen. And he's been all over the map on Russia, right? His message doesn't make sense. One day he's hot, next day he's cold, and it's not working, right? It's not effective. And on this one, he got a win, but he can't just say I got the win, pocket it, and move on. This is a win that requires continual management. He's planted the seed. Now he has to keep on watering it until it blossoms, right? So that I don't know if he has that either. And I think that's the real big X factor here. Can Netanyahu, to go back to full circle, he's been around long. It's remember they always had those pictures of Castro as President Cuba, and there's 12 presidents alongside him, and he's still there. I mean, can Netanyahu in the back of his mind think, it's tough times, that I can outlast this guy? He may very well think that. You never know.
Well, Donald Trump has shown it's not always wise to bet against him. No,
I know.
That's a tough.
No.
That's a tough fight. That one.
No.
Moving closer to home, I know you've been talking about the elections, and I am curious to get. I know you campaigned for Bernie Sanders, right, at one point. So what, obviously, I'm curious to get your take given the question of the Middle East, about what's going to happen in New York?
Oh yeah. The issue that is totally destroying my inbox and my Twitter feed and my text messaging. Oh my God, the freak out is here. It's wild. So I was the Jewish director for the Sanders campaign in 2020. I was a surrogate for the Obama campaign in 2012. I worked on the Middle East and foreign policy teams for the Biden team as well. So I've kind of worked across the gamut, but I have some experience working in the Sanders world on these issues through that experience of a few months. And it's extraordinary to watch. It's fascinating because basically the Jewish infrastructure that supported Sarah Sanders when he ran for president is basically the Jewish infrastructure supporting Mamdani right now for mayor in New York. The names, the people, the approaches, the messaging is literally what was the base of much of the Sanders work. But there were big difference between Mamdani and Sanders in terms of doesn't even say that Israel should exist as a Jewish state. It's a big difference. When it comes to what's going on, I mean, from a political perspective, democratic political perspective, there's a bit of an unknown. He has excited the base in this group. He's done very well. It's a blue, democratic, safe seat. So that should mean that because he's Democratic nominee, Mamdani will win. But there are a lot of people in New York who are not interested in what he's offering. And the question is turnout. And some of the precinct readouts are that older voters are coming out in droves. I don't know the math. I'm only speculating. I mean, who knows? But like, there are more human beings at a gross number between age 40 and 80 than there are between age 20 and 40, I would guess, right? It just seems mathematically. Somebody knows this. I don't. So if Cuomo can turn out the 40 to 80 somethings who are probably more leaning his way, he could surprise. It's politics. Anything can happen. But the Mamdani phenomenon is really impactful on Jewish politics within the Democratic Party, because what it's doing now is sort of it's demonstrating that there's a chunk, a big, a crucial constituency that is willing to play in primaries on the issues of Israel and Palestine, which he was very public about. He was not hiding his views. And that is a political juggernaut to pay attention to in the primaries, in particular in deep blue districts. And that's something that I think a lot of folks who are in the more center part of the Jewish political environment have always sort of poo-pooed or felt that they had a way to win. I don't think they can take that for truth at all. And I think the political dynamics have totally shifted to the left in the party. And Mamdani was able to use that infrastructure I described and others to win in a surprise shocker in the primary, but he had no resistance to him really in that primary from other organizations, because a lot of those organizations in the Jewish world tend to not want to get in the middle of primaries. They wait to the general election. So it's fascinating.
And there may have been, obviously awareness, to your point, for a certain demographic, the young demographic, was extraordinary. How he was able to cultivate that. But I think, this is a totally unscientific hunch based on no data whatsoever, other than Vicky Ward going out and about from time to time. I think that there were a lot of people who possibly were turned off by Cuomo. There's so much baggage there, and just weren't paying attention.
Right.
They sort of thought it was a fait accompli for Cuomo, and then this guy comes out of the blue, which therefore, to your point, does mean, well, now Mamdani is not unheard of when people are paying attention. And so the question is, what does that do to move the needle? And I mean, I haven't. It's the most energized mayoral election. I've lived in New York since 1997, and I don't remember. I mean, it's all people are asking each other at the moment. Have you voted? and who are you voting for? I mean, it's a really I think it's going to be a big day on Tuesday. We'll see.
So if I can add a couple of things that I think thematically are important takeaways from this as well, regardless of how it turns out, which I think the money is on Mamdani, but you never know. Thematically, inside the Democratic Party and the Republican Party too, but in Democrats really much more actually than Republicans, is we care about endorsements. We care about groups. And groups who endorse us make us feel like we have a better chance of winning. The unions, etc. Well, the group endorsements now for the progressive groups that get involved in campaigns politically that end up moving resources, messaging, canvassing, voter turnout operations, they matter. Those groups are part of an intersectional coalition of groups that have moved the Palestine issue to like the top, right? So like they work with each other. They may not be Palestine focused. They may care about preventing gun violence or climate, but one of the issues within their list is Palestine. And so that now has jumped the line. We've seen in the last couple of years, it's jumped the line. Much of the protest movement about the war from the left came from folks who had never worked on Israel-Palestine before, which is why, they probably couldn't answer questions about the conflict because they didn't know much about the conflict. They just knew this is what they had to protest because this is part of what the movement does. Those groups are now across the country in every Democratic primary. And so for Democratic candidates to get endorsed, to feel like they can win a primary, which is basically like 90% of the seats of Democratic seats are safe blue seats, right? Their purple ones determine who's the majority, but most overwhelming majority are safe blue. So the general election doesn't matter. You need to only win Democrats to get in. They're going to be facing questions about their views on Palestine. And everybody in the back of their mind is going to have the Mamdani point, right? Like if you're to the right on Israel-Palestine, it will cost in the primary. And that will mean that a lot of these candidates won't get through. So there's a real recalibration that has to take place in Democratic politics about what is possible on the Israel-Palestine issue in competitive internal primaries. We're in a new baseline right now.
Well, I will tell you, I went to a debate last week at the 92nd Street. Why?
You went to the Sapir Journal thing.
I did. And it was really, really interesting. It was a fascinating debate. But, the numbers showed that, I mean, it was a small margin, but basically most people in the audience, and the question was, can Zionism survive on the left? And I will say it slightly problematic because I think there was a consensus on the stage. What do you mean by left? Do you mean can it survive in the Democratic Party, or can it's I think so.
Such a Jewish debate.
That was very valid, actually. It depends, and it depends.
Did they ask how do you define Zionism? Sorry. Okay.
No, a fair point. And but the answer, the majority of the audience said no on their way in, and at the end of the debate, the majority of the audience still said no. But the other side caught up a bit. But we live in
that no meaning Zionism cannot survive in the left.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So anyone who wants to watch that can go on.
Well, I saw a clip. I think I saw a clip of Batia arguing that it's to her shocking because so many of the liberal ideas in American politics were from Jews, which is sort of like a half answer, because it's true that like civil liberties, civil rights issues, I don't know, reproductive rights, the whole host of these issues, Jews were very much at the vanguard of advancing them in organizing and organizational leadership. But that wasn't about Israel stuff. But those Jews were overwhelmingly Zionist, right? Like RBG was a staunch Zionist. She would have been canceled today. She would not be allowed in the room.
Right.
Louis Brandeis, massive Zionist, first Jewish Supreme Court justice. So what's intriguing to me also is this question of the liberal Jews. Are they still Zionist? Right? And so there's the broader left, but what about the left Jews? And I think that's a real fight right now. I know I am. I'll just say that very bluntly, comfortably. But going back to the thing I mentioned earlier, the base for Mamdani in the Jewish community, they are not Zionists of the Jewish community. There are some who are, but they're very open about anti-Zionism through some organizations, and then also sort of celebrating the diaspora community, the Yiddishkeit, the sort of Bund Jewish tradition pre-Zionism's rise. We're talking really inner Jewish politics here, but that's a lot of it. And so I think that's also a major struggle in the Jewish left about the Zionist versus anti-Zionist dynamic and how that ends up influencing democratic politics too.
That's really interesting. It's
all right. Well, crazy moment.
We could be here.
Can I tell you one more personal thing real quick?
Yeah,
I know
you got to wrap. Of course.
So the Mamdani rally was in Queens, like in Forest Hills. Yeah. My grandmother lived in Forest Hills. Right. And so I would visit her going back to the early 80s. That's when I think even I remember in the 70s too, but I definitely know the 80s, the 90s, whatnot. It was like a very Jewish, very Russian neighborhood. And then you saw the transition, and it's a very dynamic immigrant neighborhood now, very different from just 30 years ago, living memory. And I think she would have been very comfortable in both spaces, to be honest, being a daughter of immigrants herself. But I found it fascinating. It's Forest Hills. It's New York. It's the fulcrum of Jewish life in America. And it's wrestling with these highly relevant questions within a political moment that we have no parallel for. So it's a really interesting moment that we're in.
Well, that is a great note on which to end this cliffhanger, and hopefully we'll talk to you after the election, Joel, and we can have a post, whatever it is, an analysis of whatever has happened. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, Vicky. Thanks, everybody. Bye.